to digest the wonderful science we are going to hear from our eminent and mentor and educator, Professor Rashad Barsoum. Professor Rashad Barsoum is Egyptian nephrology for all of us.
I'd like to start by thanking Professor Tariq El-Baz and Professor Hussein Shaheen for inviting me to make the first presentation in this very promising Congress. I am honored and thrilled. Thank you very much. The topic that Professor Hussein Shaheen has asked me to address came right in time, because at the moment we are at the peak of implementation of a new system for the reform of medical education in this country. So I'm going to go through this and show you that starting from the time of the pharaohs that we have enjoyed the music of at this moment, we'll also enjoy some science from the time of the pharaohs. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about science of the pharaohs, but starting with this Imhotep. This guy lived in this period of time, 2650 to 2600 BC. He was the highest priest of Heliopolis. He was the administrator of the great palace, chancellor of the king of Egypt, and so on. He was a builder, chief carpenter. He was an architect and was the maker of the bases of the king. And he was a doctor, and he had two students. These two students actually carried the heritage of Imhotep over the years. And as a doctor, he was a very distinguished doctor because he actually lit this candle of being expert in management. He was expert in ethics, being a priest. He was expert in vision, being an engineer. He was an expert in art, and was an expert in training, so he trained these doctors. And look at these 5 features that make a good doctor, and Imhotep was one. His heritage has propagated all over the world, and his teachings have continued over many decades, reaching very, very long distances to the west and to the east. He actually inspired many people. And his science has been refined over the years to Hippocrates, who was a philosopher. He described cases very meticulously, and his clinical description was very methodological. Actually, the way we describe diseases today has been started by Hippocrates. And then Galen came in and introduced the art of using anatomy in describing diseases, and he based his anatomy on the dissection of animals, and he developed theories on physiology and pharmacology and so on. And then came Avicenna, who was one of the greatest scientists ever. Actually, the teachings of Avicenna in his book, The Canon of Medicine, Al-Qanun fi Tibb, that was written in 1025, he was the first to describe clinical trials in his way, giving a medicine to people and giving a placebo to others, and seeing the differences between the medicine and the placebo. So he actually founded all what we may think about today in designing a clinical trial. Experimental medicine started many, many decades later by Claude Bernard in France, who started animal experiments to understand more of the physiology and biochemistry. He actually invented the milieu interieur that every one of us studies in physiology. And his successor, actually he lived almost at the same time, was Pavlov with his famous experiments on dogs that we all learn in physiology. So experimental medicine started by the end of the 19th century, And it actually propagated very fast. So by the early 20th century, medical education yielded two kinds of medical practice. One is experimental research, which propagated into bench research, and clinical medicine. Academics used to combine experimental research and bench research with clinical medicine, whereas clinicians were isolated. They did not do any experiments at the beginning of this century. And this was obviously encouraged by the fact that experimental research was much more rewarding in physiology, microbiology, biochemistry, immunology, and so on. These people who chose experimental research could publish in prestigious journals. This is the first issue of Nature that was published in 1869, and it continues to publish the first-class work, mostly on bench research and experimental work and so on. And most of the Nobel Prizes went to scientists who were working on these basic science issues. But clinical practice, on the other hand, was not that fortunate, because knowledge of people went down gradually. Those who focused only on clinical work got less and less educated with time. Actually, there have been many studies showing that a clinician doesn't use more than 20 to 30% of his knowledge at most. So by time, it's only this 20 or 30% that persisted. The rest used to vanish. It is true that skill and experience grew up with time. But these were not very safe, because when you depend on your skill and your experience, you are very likely to fall into impressions and certain biases without evidence. And that is serious. You can just remember the good cases and remember the bad cases. You remember the beautiful girl with long eyelashes who has got tuberculosis. I used to learn that beautiful girls get TB more frequently than not so good looking girls. It's because you remember that unfortunate nice girl who got TB and you tend to forget the others. So these kinds of impressions used to be taught in medical schools without any evidence, as you know. It is unfortunate that this breakdown into bench research on one hand and clinical research on the other has been sadly displayed in medical practice today in this country. So if you look into these four kinds of medical specialization in this country, you will see that about 10% of doctors in this country work in academic medicine. And these are the teachers in the universities and some research institutions, only 10%. Another 10% do some postgraduate studies. They get a master's degree or a doctorate degree and practice in their clinics or hospitals. 50%, half of the doctors in Egypt do not do any postgraduate studies at all. They just get their MBBCH and continue with the MBBCH until they finish practicing. And that is a very sad figure, because you see how much knowledge is being dissipated and how much patients are being treated with doctors who are not up to date, who are not trained well enough. And the worst part of it is these 30% who vanish, they disappear. If you count the number of graduates of medical schools and count the number of doctors working in the country, you find a 30% loss. These probably immigrated or worked in other countries, and very unfortunately, some of them just leave medicine. They quit medicine. They work in business or in hotel industry or whatever, but they don't work as doctors. And this is obviously a dissipation of resources, because you taught these people and spent so much to make doctors, not to make hotel receptionists. So you could not attract them to continue working in academic medicine or clinical medicine, and you lose them. So obviously this is a very bad scenario that wouldn't be accepted. So we decided about 5 years ago to reform the whole thing. It was a very ambitious thing, and when we started to think about reforming this situation, people said, "You are dreaming," and we said that without dreams, there is no way out. We'll just drown within this vicious circle of staying within the same sad scenario. So the Medical Sector Committee of the Supreme Council of Universities made a campaign that included many partners, including the universities, all the Egyptian universities, the 23 state universities and the 2 private universities, the Ministry of Health, the Medical Syndicate, and the Military Academy. And they all worked together and communicated part-time with the National Authority for Quality Assurance and Accreditation that is supposed to, it's an independent body in this country that, that accredits hospitals and institutions and so on. With the Ministry of Education, because we felt that reforming medical performance cannot start when you start studying medicine, it should start before that. It should start when the students are in college, in secondary schools. And there is a very nice association in the United States called the Association of Egyptian American Scholars. These are Egyptians who have achieved scholarly positions in the US, deans, rectors of universities and so on, and they have an association that got in touch with us. And they helped us a great deal in auditing what we used to produce at that time. We produced documents, sent them to them, they held committees, and came back with recommendations that we digested and so on. Both the Ministers of Health and Higher Education were very supportive, and they provided legal advisors for us to proceed with these processes. Actually, if you count the number of persons who worked to produce this reform, they are now amounting to about 200 persons who have worked very hard to come up with the reform plan that we formed. And the plan was based on trying to address this sad situation about clinical practice by producing continued medical education plans for to update doctors and to avoid the knowledge being dissipated that badly, and to avoid the biases and wrong impressions by doing research, by encouraging the clinical practicing physicians to do research, to enlighten their brains, to help them to exercise thinking, critical analysis, and so on. And the categories of doctors and persons that we used to address was actually building a new pyramid. Starting with pre-university education, we made recommendations of how you can address the candidate in the secondary school or college. Those who are likely to become physicians at one point should receive a very special education and talent promotion and so on. We changed a lot of the medical school bylaws. They have, practically all of them have changed their bylaws now into the credit hour or credit point system, transferable systems that are now integrating the hospital education with the theoretical teaching and so on. And we addressed the postgraduates as well as those who are already practicing after having a postgraduate certification by continued medical education. We also did not forget that a patient is not taken care of only by doctors, but also by nurses and physiotherapists and other health professionals. So all of these were invited on board to try and extend links between the doctors and these other disciplines as well. I'll focus for the rest of my talk on the postgraduates and the continued medical education programs concerning education. And the story is this. You get a national graduate from one of the national schools, medical schools in the country. He works as a house officer for 1 year. This is what is happening today. We already developed and implemented a national house officer training program where house officers receive everywhere, in public health hospitals, in the university hospitals, anywhere. Any house officer would receive the same kind of training, followed by a test. And then they would choose either working in a non-clinical area like bench research, and they want to stay away, fine, they can go there and get a license for that. But those who like to become clinical practitioners will be joined by foreign graduates. We do have many foreign graduates coming and joining this discipline. So an examination was designed here that we will call EGMLE. We expect to hold this within a few years. This is a licensing examination analogous to the USMLE of the United States. Everyone will have to sit for this examination, whether graduate in Egypt or outside Egypt. There will be no equivalence of any degrees Anyone who wants to practice on this land has to pass this examination. It's a pass-fail exam. He gets a temporary license, and during which time, 3 years, during which time he has to decide whether he or she wants to go into research and education or to pursue a professional career. Those who want to go in research or education will have clinical training, theoretical training, research, and these are the numbers of years. Here is an 18-year career for these people. They get their masters after 3 years. They complete part of the national residency training before getting the masters. Then they continue for another 2 years getting the rest of the training from the national residency training program, more research and more theory to get the doctorate. And then they become lecturers, assistant professors, and professors, the basis of promotion being academic evaluation, and then they can develop special studies and getting academic subspecialization. This is the system that is already working in the universities, so there is no change in this part. This left side of the path is unchanged. But the change is in the professional part, because until now, anybody who wants to get higher certification has to go into the university path. No way away. And the universities are very full. They cannot cope with the increasing numbers. I must tell you, we have 9,000 graduates every year. Only 1,000 have this opportunity, and the 8,000 will go somewhere else, and they will try to go to the universities getting a master's or a doctorate, and there is no room for them, so they stay unqualified. So we thought we have to have a new system for professional qualification in clinical practice, or in family medicine, or in hospital management, in administration. And all these will pass through the same national residency training program. The resident in the university will have at least the same residency training program that anybody else will have. There will be no difference in training between those who carry the title professor and those who are working in the Ministry of Health or otherwise. By finishing this, he sits for a board, a national Egyptian board, in clinical medicine or in family medicine or in health administration. After this, they become a specialist, and the specialist becomes a consultant, C, B, and A. And the way of promotion in this path would be completion of CME hours and doing some clinical research. They can also have certain courses in special skills like endoscopy or electrocardiography or dialysis, and they get a professional subspecialization, which counts in their promotion. So this is the overall plan that we have decided. We already started the National HOT program, House Officer Training Program, and in 2 weeks, by the 1st of March, the National Residency Training Program will be launched in all the universities, and hopefully very soon in the Ministry of Health, and the Army is also helping in doing that. This part of the algorithm is the responsibility of the universities. This part is the responsibility of the Ministry of Health. So there is a part here that is neither a university specialty or a public health domain. So we developed what is called the Egyptian Medical Board, that is responsible for the national things, national training programs, national examinations, whether licensing examinations or board or whatever. This is a separate body that is not university and is not Ministry of Health. So one of the functions of this Egyptian Medical Board is to strategically define and implement continued medical education. A word about this word, continued medical education. It started by this guy, David Sackett, who is a British Canadian, and that is his description that continuing medical education means using evidence-based practice, the conscientious, explicit, and judicious use of current best evidence in making decisions about the care of the individual patient. It means integrating individual clinical experience with the best available external clinical evidence from systematic research. What is best research evidence? It is very difficult for any doctor to know what is the best research evidence, because whatever you can read, you eventually cannot filter out good papers from lousy papers and get conclusions from the good papers and don't get biased and so on. It's for this reason that guidelines started to be developed to provide the best research evidence. It started in 1993 in the United States by the Renal Physicians Association that published the first, I'm focusing on kidney here, by the way, because we're on the kidney center. They published the first guidelines about care of kidney patients. And then many guidelines developed after that, the DOCI guidelines in 95, Canadian guidelines 97, EDTA-ERA in 99, CARI, which is care of Australian patients, Renal Association of the UK, DOCI, KDOCI, and NICE guidelines of the United Kingdom. So these are the main guidelines, but there are so many other guidelines. Actually, we here have developed in this country some Egyptian guidelines. When we filtered these and we studied all these, committees produced guidelines for dialysis, for anemia and dialysis patients and so on. So the duty of producing the best research evidence is the duty of societies like this, to produce what matches with the needs and the facilities and resources available for the country. But I must remind you that even Dr. Sackett, who is the father of evidence-based training, was aware that guidelines cannot work alone. Guidelines cannot be just implemented. Guidelines, best research evidence is only one part of the practice of evidence-based practice, because clinical experience has to come in here. The doctor's experience must be married to the guidelines and adapted in order to provide an individual patient with the right treatment. And also the patient's values and preferences. It's so important today that the patient's input in defining the management is respected. So the time that the doctor will tell the patient, go and do this and come back after a month has gone. Patients have to be given options, and the options have to be discussed after educating the patient about his case. And then a decision, a joint decision between the physician and the patient, then you can reach a consensus. That is not my word. These are the man who invented guidelines. That's how he expressed it. Where should we implement this continued education? Of course, it's easy to say, let everyone go back to medical school, spend a month or two, a year, and get training. And the study has been done and published into the British Medical Journal, showing that this kind of continued medical education, by sending back doctors to their medical schools to get a refreshing course, don't have any impact on medical practice. They don't change practice. They just get a vacation for 1 month or so, or a week, go and listen to the professors talking, and then going back to his work, doing exactly what he used to do before without any change. So that doesn't work. Teaching hospitals. If you send people to teaching hospitals to be integrated within the staff of the teaching hospital and show them how do the experts treat patients, this is good. But it is limited to inpatients, to patients who need admission to the hospital. And these are not the ordinary patients that you treat. One treats patients in the outpatients much more than those who go into inpatients. So sending people to teaching hospitals will improve the standards of the doctors a little bit, but not, it will not reflect on the overall practice, overall community management. So this is not enough. Short stay, special cases, this is not enough. Outpatient clinics, yes. That the doctor has to be trained in his ambience, in his hospital, in his outpatient clinic, by people attending with him to show him how to spot the case and how to make the diagnosis and how to make the management. I was very delighted to hear from Professor Tarek El-Baz that this society is sending experts out to go to the places where the doctors are working, to join them in their hospitals and their outpatient clinics, to show them how to do better practice by combining guidelines with their own practice, respect their own practice, and to see the kind of patients they are treating, and then integrate all that into a formula. Chapeau for Tarek El-Baz and the Council for doing the very right thing in this area. But also there are online resources which should be available, including updates, self-assessment programs, and of course getting accreditation online. So these three, teaching hospitals, outpatient clinics, and online resources, have been integrated into our program. And it's now developed into 7 units, 7 units all over the country. Why 7? Because Egypt is divided into 7 zones, and each zone contains 3 or 4 governorates. And each of these will have a teaching unit, a training unit, centered by a university, or maybe 2 universities if in the same zone there are 2 universities. The university is the core of this solar system, around which we will recognize a number of teaching hospitals which are accredited hospitals and have the facilities of training and diffusing the training. And around each teaching hospital there are peripheral hospitals in the smaller villages and smaller cities. And around these even there are small health units in the very small villages, and people aggregates here and there. And each of this can train, either by training the candidate through an expert on minor things like a right tube, how to put a catheter, how to put to give an intravenous infusion, and so on. But you may need more experts in more sophisticated areas, so there will be movement between the teaching hospital and the university, movements of staff. University professors will have to go to teaching hospitals and vice versa, and between the teaching hospitals, peripheral hospitals, and between the peripheral hospitals and the smaller units. So there will be a big move of everyone moving here and there to homogenize the kind of experience that we need to do. Who makes this? Who is going to provide the training? There has to be a qualification, and we have worked with the Ministry of Higher Education on a program called TOT, Training of the Trainer. And there is a lot of funds in the Ministry of Higher Education for this particular program. How do you train a trainer? And of course I can't go into full